In this short video, we're going to go how to make a Windows-based server into a domain controller. So we went to Manage, and we're going to navigate forward, make sure we're on the right server, and we're going to select Active Directory Domain Services. We're going to add the feature, next, 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 and finish. It's going to take a little while for us to get all of the features that you need for Active Directory to finish their install process. Now that the installer is completed, we'll see a yellow triangle with an exclamation point. We'll click on that, and now we'll select Promote to a domain controller. And depending on what we're doing, if it's part of another domain or if this is going to be a standalone, this is the first domain in our forest. So we're going to say Add a Forest. We're going to give it a name. In this particular one, we're going to do trantor.local. I like using local for anything that's in a test lab and using real domains when you actually and here we can select the forest functional level and the domain functional level. The domain functional level is predicated by what forest functional level you select. So if you select a previous forest functional level, then you'll be able to select a previous domain functional level, but you can't do the reverse. We're going to have DNS installed as part of this because we have no DNS servers, and the global catalog. You do need to set up a domain services recovery mode password, so if you need to do any domain recovery type services, you'll be able to actually still get into the server. We aren't connecting to any other DNS delegation servers upstream from where we are, so we don't need to worry about that. And as it calculates and goes through, it'll derive from the domain that we had selected what the NetBIOS domain name will be, because it's limited in the number of characters it can put in there. As far as it's just going to be called Trantor. Okay, default locations for all of your files. In production, you would normally want to put these on a different drive than what you have the operating system, so they are easier to recover and easier to back up. It does also create a script that you could use to do this without having to use the GUI on a future server, and you could back up that script, bring it over to another ISO, point it to it, run that script into your installer. Does a pre-flight to make sure that everything is in a happy place before you actually start the install process. So we should see a couple warnings, which is normal. Those are basically saying that DNS, but the top prerequisite check that says green is what we need before we proceed. And then it starts the promotion process to turn this into a domain controller. It's setting up the DNS service in the background and setting up all of the Active Directory components to have this as a domain controller and a new forest. It takes a little while to progress through the installation process. Once it does finish, it's going to restart the desktop. And because this is now going to be a domain controller, when it does come up, we'll be logging into the domain, Trantor, and then the user administrator. You can no longer log in locally to the server once you make it a domain controller. Now that our domain controller is set up, we'll need to make a couple small changes and just do some validations to make sure everything is set up how we need it. We can see that the domain now is trantor.local. One thing that happens when you promote a domain controller or join a member server to the domain is it does turn on a domain firewall. So in our case, we're turning off those firewalls for our labs. And then now we're going to go into DNS, and by default a reverse lookup zone is not set up, and we need to set up a reverse lookup zone. First, we're double checking our forward lookup zone, making sure everything is looking like it's supposed to. We have a record for Mars, we have a record for Active Directory. Now we're going to create a reverse lookup zone. We're going to do a primary zone. And our primary zone is going to be for all DNS services, IPv4, and it's the first 3 octets of your DNS or your IP range that you're using on this server. And ours is 192.168.79. Then finish. That sets up a reverse lookup zone. You want to do this before you start adding any other servers to your domain. Then we need to go into Mars, select Update Associated PTR Records, so that will automatically, as dynamic DNS records are entered, create that reverse lookup record for them. So if we go into our reverse lookup records now, we do have a record for Mars and for Active Directory on the reverse lookup. Now we're going to just double check a couple of the DNS settings to make sure they're as expected. So the IP address that DNS is listening on is the same as the server. Our upstream IP addresses for DNS lookups are resolving properly, so we can read those. And then what we want to do is just double check what the NIC is listening on. It should be set so the primary is 127.0.0.1, which is a loop back to itself. You should also put a secondary in there pointing to a upstream DNS provider in case your local DNS has a hiccup. And that is it.